What is Happening with the Media? Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman is a book written in 1984. The first chapter of this book is titled The Medium is the Metaphor. And in this chapter, Neil describes the medium as all of the elements and activities that surround us. Politics, entertainment, education, and in this modern age, the most important of them all, the media. Imagine if a single group had the power to manipulate these mediums, controlling these mediums around you, and thus controlling not only your thinking, but also that of future generations. This group, with a dark history of assassinations and genocides, now seeks to brainwash its own people through any means necessary and desires ultimate control. In order to understand what is happening today, we have to take a look back at where it all started. It all began in 1963 during the intense Cold War period with the launch of Project Mockingbird. Project Mockingbird is a large-scale CIA program that manipulated domestic American news media organizations for propaganda purposes. The CIA recruited leading American journalists into a propaganda network. A total of 50 journalists from every major news outlet around that time had secret relations with the CIA. Additionally, many of these journalists were anti-war activists or were reporting on government affairs. Later on, the CIA also decided to get involved and take control over Hollywood actors, movie directors, and scriptwriters.
Members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Hanson Baldwin, the official national security reporter for the New York Times, may have angered the CIA in July 1962 by disclosing classified information from a recent national intelligence assessment. This included a comparison of the nuclear arsenals of the United States and the Soviet Union, as well as their efforts to safeguard their intercontinental ballistic missile sites. In response, the CIA decided to wiretap Baldwin and secretly record the conversation with him. This was a one-on-one conversation between JFK and Baldwin. Needless to say, it was the last time that Baldwin reported on something as controversial or classified, and it was a great move, considering the fact that his entire office was wiretapped by the CIA, enabling them to keep track of his conversations and research. Other wiretapped individuals, including Robert Allen, who was the bureau chief of the Christian Science Monitor. He was wiretapped because of one of his news columns, Washington Merry-Go-Round. In addition, just a few years prior, Robert Allen infiltrated the KKK and exposed several of its members. In conclusion, Baldwin made the supply of missiles from the US and Soviet Union public, while Robert Allen wrote an anti-government newspaper column. As a result, both of them were wiretapped and had a lengthy conversation with JFK. With that being said, the revelation of their affiliation with the CIA only came to light after the retirement and subsequent disclosure by the Church Committee, the same organization responsible for exposing the CIA's MK-Ultra experiments. In addition, the publication of the Family Jewels in 2017, which details illicit activities of the CIA, revealed that a telephone interception operation, presumably referred to as Operation Mockingbird, was carried out from March 12, 1963 to June 15, 1963. The operation specifically targeted two journalists based in Washington who were publishing news articles based on classified materials from various agencies. Investigative journalist Carl Bernstein, who is known for his expose on the Watergate scandal, asserted that CIA had covertly enlisted the services of more than 400 members of the press and 25 major institutions to decimate fabricated news stories.
You are fake news.
Now, when discussing deceptive media, it's difficult not to consider some of the most misleading journalists of our time. In order to understand just what the fuck they are rambling about, we must first understand their speech techniques. Language and communication are tools that can be used for good or evil. One of the techniques commonly employed by many commentators and reporters is doublespeak. For instance, non-profit organizations are often described as having negative deficits or experiencing revenue excesses. The term political language is essentially language used for evil, not to inform but to mislead. For example, during the Vietnam War, the US used terms such as protective reaction strikes, bombings, resource control programs, poisoning the vegetation and water supply, preemptive counterattack, initiating with a first strike, and termination with extreme prejudice, killing a suspected spy without trial. As an integral component of the Mockingbird Project, the CIA conducted investigations during the Cold War era, specifically targeting the Hollywood industry in search of individuals with far-left sympathies. One of these investigations resulted in 11 offenders who were sent to jail and blacklisted. One of these offenders was actor Lee J. Cobb, who described the experience. When the facilities of the government of the United States are drawn on an individual, it can be terrifying. The blacklist is just an opening gambit, being deprived of work. Your passport is confiscated. That's minor. But not being able to move without being tailed is something else. After a certain point, it grows to implied as well as articulated threats, and people succumb. My wife did, and she was institutionalized. The HUAC did a deal with me. I was pretty much worn down. I had no money, I couldn't borrow, I had the expenses of taking care of the children. Why am I subjecting my loved ones to this? One of the first movies to be significantly altered by the government was the adaptation of the book Animal Farm by George Orwell. The CIA changed the ending of this adult animated drama so that the other animals on the farm would successfully revolt against the pigs who represented communism. Furthermore, a biography of Howard Hughes, the head of RKO Pictures, describes a deal he struck with the CIA as good for business, and talks about Hughes's crusade against communism. However, this can be seen as outdated, anti-communist propaganda. If we examine the present day, we find ourselves surrounded by movies affiliated with the Department of Defense. These DoD movies are shows or series that collaborated with the government to receive equipment or funding. In exchange, the government would have the ability to alter the movie scripts to make the army more attractive to young men, and ideally increase recruitment throughout these movies. The list of franchises or movies that were created in a symbiotic relationship with the government is Apollo 13, 4 James Bond movies, Midway, Top Gun Maverick, and the original, Karate Kid Part 2, Iron Man 1 and 2. There are a total of 400 movies that have collaborated with the Pentagon and CIA in order to receive funding. Besides army recruitment propaganda, it is evident that some of the latest movies released do follow a specific agenda. And on an even larger scale, allegations from the year 2000 claim that studio bosses from Paramount Pictures and 20th Century Fox were bribed by the officials as well. When it comes to army recruitment propaganda, video games seem like the perfect medium. First-person shooters are filled to the brim with military-aged men who seem to have a bizarre fondness of war and weapons. Agencies within the Department of Defense have contributed to the development of advanced computing systems, computer graphics, the internet, multiplayer network systems, and the 3D navigation of virtual environments. Battlezone, released in 1980, is considered the first FPS game to exist. It was developed by Atari in collaboration with the Department of Defense. However, some developers at Atari, particularly the original Battlezone programmer Ed Rotberg, declined to work on the project due to its association with the Army. In conclusion, the government became involved in the development of video games that continue to shape the entertainment industry today. Just 1 year after the release of Battlezone, Don Starry, the head of the US Training Command, seemed to have developed an interest in video games. During a press conference, he stated, "Today's soldiers have learned to learn in a different world. A world of television, electronic toys and games, computers, and a host of other electronic devices. They belong to a TV and technology generation." So how is it that our soldiers are still sitting in classrooms, still listening to lectures, still depending on books and other paper reading materials, when possibly new and better methods have been available for many years? Here, Don was implying that future soldiers might benefit from learning through video games like Battlezone. Just 13 years after that speech, the first Doom game was released. The Marines enjoyed it so much that they decided to create their own version called Marine Doom. In this version, they replaced the alien-themed graphics with military graphics, and the demons were replaced with opposing forces. Since then, the Army has made attempts to develop several other games, including America's Army. However, they likely realized that they are better off utilizing other games as training material. This realization led to Dave Anthony, a writer for Call of Duty, being summoned to the Pentagon to discuss the future of real-world modern warfare. Shortly after, Dave left his job on Call of Duty and became an advisor for the Department of Defense. Now he even started a podcast. It's difficult to determine if the government has made any alterations to modern video games, as their involvement in this field was primarily in the 80s. After that, they seemingly stepped back as the games did not appear to increase recruitment rates or prove useful for training, although they do have an esports team. Literature, to this day, remains one of the most unregulated and non-conforming mediums. While many book publishers avoid books which contain extreme political views, self-publishing is always an option. This makes it incredibly difficult to moderate content, as there is no corporation to appeal to, just an individual with a pen and an Amazon affiliate account. A particularly intriguing case related to the CIA is that of Gary Webb. Gary was an investigative journalist who published his Dark Alliance article series in the news and later wrote a book in the same name. One of the opening quotes of the book reads, "For the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood Street gangs of Los Angeles and funneled millions in drug profits to a Latin American guerrilla army run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency." And even the artwork for the website depicted a silhouette smoking a crack pipe superimposed over the CIA seal. The artwork proved controversial and was later removed by the news outlet for which Gary wrote. The entire series described the involvement of the government in the crack epidemic that plagued the US. This series caused outrage in the late 90s. After publishing Dark Alliance, Gary would go on to work at other news outlets, but he would not be able to match his former glory, given how popular Dark Alliance had become. In 2004, Gary Webb has committed suicide in his apartment, with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Although multiple gunshot suicide is a real phenomenon, Gary used a .38 special, which is a weak caliber. There are still some concerning factors at play. The pistol he used is capable of killing at point-blank range if aimed directly at the cranium. The first gunshot wound went from his right ear out his left cheek, entirely missing any vital parts, and the second one hit an artery as if he was shot from the back. However, the leading theory is that he was assassinated by the CIA. This is due to the peculiar angles of both shots he fired, which are highly unusual for a suicide. In his final article, he delved into the America's Army game, which we discussed in the previous chapter. Over the years, it has become increasingly obvious that music artists are trying to push forward a certain agenda, although it's hard to say whether they are on a government payroll or just promoting their beliefs out of their own initiative. For example, Taylor Swift is one of the most popular and beloved singers in America, with one of the most die-hard fan bases. When she publicly expressed her endorsement for Joe Biden, it was evident that this would have an impact on politics as a whole. The same could be said about Katy Perry, who in 2012 struck a deal with the Department of Defense, similar to those in the movie industry, for one of her music videos. During the 2020 elections, she decided to side with Kamala Harris, just like Taylor, sharing her political views. It's clear that the government has been trying to infiltrate the minds of citizens for decades, using every form of media as a medium to do so, silencing those who try to tell the truth, while paying those who agree and promote their agenda. And all of this started with Project Mockingbird. If you want to hear more about the CIA's shady practices, check out our previous video about MKUltra and consider subscribing to our Patreon.